Hello and welcome to Simplified. Happy, very, very belated 2023. I mean, I feel what according to you guys is the cutoff where you have to stop wishing people Happy New Year. Like
at around the same time when you stop writing 2022 when you actually mean 2023. I think there should be a name for this. Yeah.
They're really, I mean, again, another phrase which requires some kind of German or Scandinavian phrase for it. But yes, Happy New Year 2023. We are continuing our foray into still looking back. I mean, it's still recently 2023. So we are still looking into our foray of looking back at 2022 and recapping some of the stuff that we did. In fact, it's not just recapping it, but sharing some updates about what went on and the episodes that we did on the topics that we did during 2022. So yes, hello and welcome. I'm Srikeit.
I'm Naren.
I am Chuck. Hello.
And Chuck and Naren are here. Tony, unfortunately, is caught up with gainful employment, whereas the rest of us seriously lack that problem in our life as such. So here we are on a fine Thursday evening trying to have a go at it as we have for the last 6 years.
You know, this New Year thing, no? By the time this episode comes out, which I am assuming will be 16th of January, 1/24th of the New Year will be over.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I know a more mind-blowing fact that I tell myself often is that today is the 12th of January and the next 11th of January, we will experience is 11th January 2024. And that blows my mind a little because I'm like, 2024 aa gaya? And it's a weird thing, but it's my thing. Hey.
Sure. Okay. I mean, another way of thinking about it is the 2020s are 3/10 done. Okay, anyway, let's not get existential.
How did the turn of the century after when the 18th ended, how did it feel?
Turn of the century, you have to define which one.
Yeah. How did the previous turns of century feel for you?
So anyway, a wise man said that it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. So we are going to start making predictions about the past. So we're going to review whatever we've said about the future in the past and then revise those things in order to make our predictions about the future in the past better. That's where we are.
So I knew that we were going to, recap a few of the episodes that we've done over the last 1.5 years. So just to see how news has kind of changed and whether it has actually, I opened up the front pages of both New York Times and the Hindu just before recording this conversation. And honestly, the headlines that I see could be from any time over the last 2.5 years. So everything apart from COVID, that is. Let me read out a few of them. Economists expect inflation pace to have slowed slightly last month. That's a good one. AI's best trick yet is showering us with attention. Again, could be absolutely any time over the last few months. More classified documents found in another location linked to Biden. The only difference from 2022 and 2019 is which Biden we are talking about over here, Joe or Hunter. And now coming over to the Hindu. Situation along the northeastern border stable but unpredictable. Again, anytime in the last 5 years that could have been. And finally, over 18,000 toys seized pan-India from retail stores over BIS quality mark. Notices to Amazon and Flipkart.
And I got an update today that India is playing Sri Lanka. So that's true of any time in the last 15 years.
Yeah, that is true of any time in the last 20 years only. Oh, goodness. So the more things change, the more they remain the same, as they say. So that's a little bit.
There's a French phrase for this, which I remember from my French class, which I did in 1988. Yeah. So that's literally the only thing I remember from that class. And the phrase is plus ça change, plus le même chose. I think something like that. It's more the change, more the same thing. Something like that. Yeah.
Plus ça change, plus le même chose.
Yeah. See, the more I'm looking at these headlines, the more they could be like anytime. Like skeptical about Trump in 2024. Ask an opinion article on the New York Times. 52 places to go in 2023 features Kerala, India. Well. There we go. And Infosys and TCS profit rises, but that's again every time. Anyway,
I mean, the worst thing, just on the first thing that you highlighted, the worst thing that could have happened in a way to give Trump only one term is that he's still eligible to run for one term anytime in the future. Now, till that man continues to live and breathe, that's going to be true of every leap year election year that comes out. So 2024, 2028. Till the man continues to live and breathe, we are going to have that specter hanging over our heads. So
Wonderful.
that's going to be fun.
So let us look back then on a few topics that we spoke about over the last year and give you some kind of updates, because we want to make our listeners know that we actually keep ourselves updated about these topics as well. So a nice way to start might actually be to look at something that happened just a couple of weeks back, or rather last week at the time of recording, which is the Consumer Electronics Show that happens at Las Vegas every year. It's being the first tech show of the year. It symbolically kind of sets the show for the recess, sets a tone for tech for the rest of the year. And it kind of becomes representative of what is trending in tech at that point of time, right? Like last year, for instance, there was a lot of noise around the metaverse, for instance. Something, thankfully, that is not too much this time around. Similarly, other absolute excrescences on the face of society, such as NFTs and cryptocurrency, are also not too much to be seen. Instead, what seems to be happening is a lot of conversation around electric vehicles. And that's kind of heartening. That's kind of nice. It's not just the big sexy sedans, but also very practical, portable, two-seater kind of things. If anyone in India would have seen those Reva vehicles from about a decade ago, those kind of things are making comeback. And even micro-mobility, like electric scooters and things like that, are also kind of doing the rounds. So that's kind of nice. So I see like the changing landscape of tech sometimes being reflected in what the main themes at CES are. Last year and the year before, it was a lot of remote work and a lot of stuff around the metaverse and stuff like that. And this year seems to be more around climate tech and, practical living, kitchen technology, robot companions and stuff like that, and of course electric cars. And the interesting thing, and Naren, I'm sure you'll have a point of view on this as well, it's not just the cars by themselves but also the infrastructure around it. There's a lot of stuff around swappable batteries, better software, better driver assistance and stuff like that as well. So yeah, that to me is one change in tech that I'm seeing. We'll maybe talk about big tech and all that later, but this is one thing I wanted to say. So, and what is also kind of interesting is that this is happening just a couple of days back at the Auto Expo that's happening here in India. There have been lots of EVs that have been announced by both foreign and Indian cars. Tata, I think, is announced a fleet of some 10 or 15 EVs that are planned over the next few years. And along with that,
Mahindra is another
Mahindra
big, like literally every one of their models is coming out in an electric flavor.
Yeah. And of course, they own Reva now, right? So what do you think about this, Naren? Like, what do you see, like, as somebody who is kind of in the auto space? What have you been hearing? Tell us what stocks to buy.
Yeah. So first thing is, it has taken me by surprise. So 1 year ago, all of us in the automotive world were skeptical, and some people are even derisive about the hopes, aspirations, and claims that the electric side of things were doing. Why? Because two things. One, the batteries themselves, very expensive, supply chain very bad. So there aren't enough batteries being produced. And the second part is the charging infrastructure, right? So the charging time and charging infrastructure. So recently my son was telling me, and this keeps happening all the time. There was I think a long weekend or something in the US, Christmas or something like that, and everybody and his uncle went to Yosemite, which is a national park near San Francisco. And being San Francisco and California and all, lot of electric vehicles there. They had to wait several hours in line just to get to a supercharger, because so he had a friend who, like, literally his entire vacation was spent getting charged. So of course these are things that these are the extremes. The good part of it is that availability and performance have both improved in that 1 year since I was talking about. Last year this time I would have said, now even in India there are a lot more electric vehicles. They are pretty good. I don't know if they're as good as Tesla, probably not, but they're pretty good. They're close. So all of us must have traveled in an electric car, or most of us would have. They're very silent, they're very smooth, they accelerate like really quickly, performance, everything is fine. So it's very clear that it's going to take over. Now the main roadblocks to this, basically the availability of batteries, is something that has still not been solved. So a lot of people hope that the chemistry of the battery will change. Right now it's all based on lithium, which is very scarce. But there is some hope that they will be able to change it to magnesium, which is far more plentiful. Whenever something like this happens, it might be a year, it might be 5 years, at some point of time, this will flip and we will suddenly find only electric cars. So like, no one will even bother making diesel and petrol cars, is what people in the industry feel. So this is my low and dirty. But yeah, it's no one knows when it's going to happen. So if you're a gambling man, you could place your bets. It could happen like
I think one interesting angle here is what I feel, and this is solely based on some reading I did after watching one particular Shark Tank India episode actually, where there is this one guy who had actually come to pitch about EV bikes, as in cycles that are like e-bikes or EV bikes kind of thing. And I mean, one thing that really blew me away, because I was actually looking up EV bikes on a more international level, and the pricing as far as Indian EV bikes is concerned was like seriously dirt cheap. Like you can get like the cheapest e-bike, which is effectively a scooter, right? For as little as like 20 grand, right? And they are good quality with like detachable batteries, rechargeable stuff. They also have like the dynamo function, which allows it to be very fast in recharging, and they already have a lot of reserve in some way or the other. So I think once that particular thing comes in, and if say they are able to create like these knockdown units, right, which can be sent over to rural and semi-urban and remote areas in India, right, the mobility aspect of things will take a huge, like, because what would be otherwise a 20-kilometer cycle round trip, which would be a difficult prospect for very many people, could become a bike ride. And then therefore have that much more of an implication as far as development is concerned. So that, like you said, I think
productivity. So someone who has to cycle 10 or 20 kilometers and work is not going to be able to perform that well as someone who takes a bike too. So
yeah, so I mean, that aspect is, I think, a really interesting one about those e-bikes. And I think electric mobility going beyond cars, like how does it kind of extend to like bikes and all that stuff, like and plus over the last year we also saw a lot of the craziness about the bikes catching fire and stuff like that, which also kind of indicates like there is, and now actually therefore because of that, the negative PR that got created around that entire incident, now everybody is in fact talking about, oh, I don't want to get my batteries from China, I want to kind of make in India. Right. So this one particular entrepreneur there, they have a factory set up in Hyderabad and they're making their own batteries in India and stuff like that. So that's also an interesting move in a time where a large amount of raw material and basic components are being sourced from China.
There is
so overall pretty interesting. The winds seem to, I mean, multiple outlets have seen called 2022 the tipping point when it came to electric vehicles, at least in kind of like the West, right? It seems like it's pretty much
also the
path that is going to go on.
Stage is set for my favorite Yes Prime Minister quote, because I'm very excited because everyone is talking about it right now. People are not talking about it so much last year. And you know what happens when everyone...
Yes, Minister? Wait, they're talking about Yes Minister?
Everyone's... about electric vehicle, right? Electric transport. And the quote is, you know what, if people start talking about something, eventually they start thinking about it. So that augurs well for them.
In a weird kind of way, and I can't believe I'm going to utter these words, I feel sorry for Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if last year was kind of like the tipping point for EVs, it kind of feels like he wavered his attention away from, at the... I mean, whatever our opinion of the man right now, let's give him his due credit for what he did for the EV scene, as it were. And it's kind of painful to see Tesla suffering. In fact, there are reports of Tesla owners being laughed at and all that. So Tesla, once seen as a poster boy for liberals, is now is weird.
I think there is a tweet which I saw where there is basically China users of Tesla all went revolting or like all went protesting against the Tesla stores over there, because what happened was, I mean, they bought the car and immediately Tesla slashed the prices of their cars.
Oh.
And those new owners were like, why the hell did we not get these slashed prices and all that? And they went like, whatever. And at that point also, I mean, as a commentary on the general lack of management and lack of focus Elon Musk is now keep putting on Tesla, I think someone wrote a tweet saying that Tesla owners, it's a delicious irony that you one morning will wake up and not be able to start your own Teslas because the service has like gone dead or something because of the fact that the owner of the company is focusing on fighting meme battles on Twitter.
Yeah, and when you can't charge your car again, then it'll truly become a revolt. Moving on
Yo,
to
true.
the next topic that we have. Last year, everyone suddenly became a supply chain expert on Twitter, just like the year before, everyone became whatever vaccine expert. Who every year we become some we get a new honorary degree, all of us. So, Naren, you I think are the best suited of all of us to talk about supply chain and all that. So, what do you think? There was no
Before we get into this topic, one thing that kind of struck me about the expert aspect was I recently have been observing the beautiful pivots that a lot of crypto experts have been doing. So the ones who were last year like touting at the beginning of the last year, touting themselves as crypto experts and stuff like that, I really actually saw, and obviously no names will be mentioned, I actually saw one of those guys who was like a big crypto expert and blockchain enthusiast and all that have rebranded themselves as finance experts. And I'm like, seriously, I think if anyone needs to take finance advice, you are the last person I would take it from.
Yep, that's fair.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, that was a beautiful rebrand that I
But
saw.
let us not paint blockchain with the crypto brush, Srikeit. Let us not make that
That's
noob
fair.
mistake.
No, that's fair. That's fair. But yeah, I mean,
But
generally,
yeah,
it's become
point
a
taken.
yeah,
Point
it's a taboo space to come into right now. But yeah, go on. Yeah, Naren.
Yeah, so I have borne the brunt of the supply chain disruptions last year.
All of it. Wow. So you're to blame for everything.
So how we supply to automotive companies, right? And automotive companies weren't able to keep up with production because they have to procure some 5,000 different parts, right, to make an automobile. And if one of those parts doesn't come, the automobile doesn't get cranked out. So last year it was all about the chip shortage. So they were like deer caught in headlights. They didn't know what to do. And then they graduated to headless chicken. So a lot of running around, but really no idea what to do. And then automotive companies started doing some engineering. They started repurposing old chips, re-engineering, reducing, making discrete. A lot of things were done. And the supply chain came back to normal. So things came back, but everyone got the scare of their life. So everyone started reviewing the givens, so a lot of things they just and many industries which were not taken seriously. You get it. The thing about globalization before all these crises happened was that everything is fungible. You just throw money, you will get it. It's just a matter of a little bit of logistics cost. But during the pandemic, not just the logistic cost went up, the very availability of it became a question mark. Then all kinds of political ambitions started coming into play. China started flexing its muscles. People allege that some of the crises that were happening in China were manufactured by the Chinese Communist Party just to sort of see how important they were to. I don't believe that because they still haven't been able to come out of whatever they have created. So lot of changes happening in supply chain thinking. So America is the first. It's starting to build chips. It's going to take them like forever. It's going to take them 5 years at the very least to come up with any kind of chip making industry in their own country. But they've started, and now there is no stopping. Their money is committed. We are also doing it. India is doing it. India is, as Srikeit was saying, things like lithium ion batteries, which nobody in India would have in their wildest dreams thought of putting up a plant because it's available so cheap from China. But now that thinking has gone away. So a lot of change.
It's so fascinating. No, both of these, like all of these topics that we've spoken about till now, and indeed so many others, it's kind of interesting how just so many macro topics are like coming at each other, right? There is the politics, there's the Ukrainian war, there is the supply chain crisis, there's a pandemic on top of all this. Like, indeed, the story of semiconductors over the last year can be looked at from so many of these different angles. One is purely from a technology point of view, we need more and more chips. Two is because of geopolitics, people want to move away from Taiwan, which is under always imminent threat of being attacked and all that. And it's just kind of fascinating to me. And if you remember, guys, long back, like I don't remember, maybe some 2-3 years back, we did an episode on those two, right? ASML and TSMC,
Yeah.
the two
The two
then
chip manufacturers.
unknown guys. Guys
Yeah.
who were making chips, and the huge EUV machines that ASML makes, which are now kind of like household names, at least in households that listen to Simplified. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
No, but I also, just to add on to what you were saying, I think this is something I may have mentioned on Simplified or was talking generally, was I think the pandemic kind of, I mean, as a macro event, the pandemic kind of like rewired a lot of personal as well as institutional as well as governmental thinking in terms of making and concretizing long-term plans.
Yeah.
Like for saying that, what, okay, I know this thing, like Naren was saying, that I know lithium ion batteries will come from China, right? And I think because of the lockdowns and the unprecedented scale of the shutdowns that happened, it kind of has jarred people into thinking that, hey, tomorrow the tap could be shut at any point of time and I need to have some kind of contingencies, right? And I think that contingency level thinking has actually kind of crept into a lot of individual, institutional and governmental thinking.
Yeah.
So I think
one, because of pandemic, and two, because of the war as well, which kind of accelerated a lot of other green thinking. So it's kind of interesting. Actually, when you said that, that's actually kind of interesting. We've always lamented the fact that governments think too short term and they think only what the next election is going to be. But right now, in a weird kind of way, it's almost like announcing these activities becomes a signal in itself, which kind of serves the purpose of short term thinking. So, yay, China. Thanks. I'm not quite sure how to like mix up, but you're right? Whether it's renewable energy over there or whatever it is we're doing over here, or Biden's plans for chips and green tech and all that in the US. Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's a positive way of thinking about it. So yeah, yay, well done.
Yeah, China, in my opinion, China should get the Nobel Peace Prize for every year, right? I'll tell you why. Number one is nobody asked for it, but Mao decided to have this one-child policy, and it screwed up China, but it benefited the world at large, right? So China is cannot be this menacing sort of ogre for long. He's just getting too old. So we have Mao to thank for that. And now, just when everyone thought that China's got everybody's sort of balls in their grasp, and
you can say it, yes.
They go and pick up a fight with everyone, and so everyone's sort of making sure that their balls are not in China's hands. So you're going to get
Naren, interesting. So I want to ask you, so when you say fears were in China's hands, who did you mean by everyone? Because depending on context, it can mean a whole bunch of things. So who did you mean by everyone?
America.
So you mean countries. So you mean countries, right? Yeah, countries. So they're pissed off pretty much everybody. They're pretty much pissed off. But what's also interesting over the last year is that they've pissed off a lot of people domestically. Like, look at how they've ravaged their own tech sector, almost like shooting themselves in the foot. So kind of like now nobody will want to actually set up something in China. And I've been seeing headlines that high net worth individuals and people with entrepreneurial ideas are planning to like move out of the country now that the restrictions are lifted. I don't know. China seems to have been in such a position of power just 3 years ago, and they kind of like relinquished all that. In some sense, it's sad to see because of the huge number.
I mean, jokes apart, it's sad. What could have been? It's no fault of the Chinese people, right? Who have made incredible sacrifices and
dissent. There are strains of dissent in that country for the first time in goodness knows how long. So it'll be.
It shows the problem with having dictatorial, megalomaniac leaders anywhere in the world. They quickly a cocoon of a sort of shield of sycophants develops around them. They stop listening to anything other than praises of themselves, and it goes downhill, which would not be so bad, except that when it's the leader of a country, he takes the entire country with him. So that's pretty
precisely bad. And actually this is actually a great thing. I mean, we have the classic narrative of all old Indian uncles talking about India dictator ho jata to West hota type of narrative that's there. While you have, I mean, yes, the growth of China has been because of singular focused thinking, and a lot of it has worked out that way. The point is this, that when you hinge anything on just one or a small group of people's thinking, the moment they start thinking awry or they start thinking wrongly or they don't really focus on the right issues or their ego comes into play or something like that happens, is when you're actually see a country like just go off the rails just as quickly as it was on the rails.
Yeah, it doesn't take time. Incredible how quick it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's a whole lot about where did we start
Supply
this?
chain,
How did we end
supply
up with
chain,
China?
yeah.
Weren't we
Supply
talking about
chain.
ships a while back? Okay, cool. All right, that's great. Also, wasn't Winnie the Pooh from Yosemite or something? So that connects two things that we spoke about in this
Oh, I
episode.
didn't
We
know
started
that.
with
Yogi
Yosemite
Bear
somewhere,
was from Yosemite.
and of course, Xi Jinping, as we all know, is just an evil avatar of Winnie the Pooh, as has been said.
I think Yogi Bear was from Yosemite.
Yogi Bear. Oh, correct. Yogi Bear.
Yeah,
Okay,
Winnie
so
the Pooh is he's not American if I'm not mistaken. Or whatever, I don't know.
Okay, never mind. Doesn't matter. Okay, so a couple more things for us to recap, and we will do that right after this break. Welcome back to Simplified, and now here we have our Colombo correspondent, and Srikeit is going to give us an update on what's happening in Sri Lanka, a country that was, in the midst of a huge crisis last year. Are they still in said crisis, Srikeit?
So yeah, so I mean the thing is this, that there was this, like, I still remember when the protests were at their peak and there were these like sights of people entering the presidential palace and someone swimming in the presidential pool and all that kind of stuff that was happening. And there was like this huge like, oh, okay, we have overthrown this crazy, like an Arab Spring kind of moment, right? But the thing is, the revolution really never really got completed, and that's the problem with like a lot of instinct led revolutions in some way. So what it did result in, which was a big achievement unto itself, was that Rajapaksa Gotabaya got removed from office, who was pretty well known as an extremely corrupt leader, and corruption did play a big part in Sri Lanka's downfall as a state. But as we recapped in that episode, corruption wasn't the only thing that really caused the entire problem, right? It, as we talked about it began from 2019, where the Easter Island bombings happened, to 2020 when the pandemic happened, it continuing into 2021, 2022, and post the protests, actually the situation has largely remained the same. But it's just that the situation has largely remained the same, but the lack of protests has actually kind of like hidden the situation under things. So the top lines, what I can see is that one is that after Rajapaksa Gotabaya got kicked out, Ramil Vikramasinghe took over as a president. It's not someone that the public elected as this great populist leader to replace this particular guy, but it was more a situation of this is the next best guy that we have, and it's no longer Gotabaya, right? Gotabaya and his family's network that they spread everywhere. Now, not that this guy is doing a terrible job, but the situation, as we said, is multiple things, right? Sri Lanka's economy was in peril because of a lot of geopolitical as well as mismanagement, as well as just pure bad luck situations, right? So when the pandemic kind of eased off, the war in Ukraine happened. The war in Ukraine kind of has continued now, which has caused hyperinflation to the extent that overall inflation is about 70% in Sri Lanka, and food inflation is 100%. So over the last 2 years, like, food has become doubly expensive. And it's come to a point where what has really worked in some way, which has kind of like masked the issue a little bit or caused it a little improvement, is because of the pandemic restrictions opening up has allowed for more tourism to happen in Sri Lanka. More international influx of visitors and all that stuff has happened, which has to some extent improved the overall economic situation to some extent. But the larger underlying issues, like there's still fuel shortages, there's still what they used to say was, during the protest there were about 6 hours of power cuts every day because of a lack of fuel as such. Now there are 2 hours of regular of power outages, which kind of people have gotten used to, right? But people are actually making a huge whole bunch of cuts. Like, education has become like the one big concern in an article I read was, lot of parents and a lot of general academicians are worried about is, since the pandemic went on, right, because of the Sri Lankan economic situation being as bad as it was, a large number of students exited the academic
school
roster.
system.
And teachers as well.
And teachers as well. and they didn't have remote learning very significantly. And when the rest of the world has largely gone back to the schools, all the students have gone back to schools in Sri Lanka, because of the costs and because of the inflation, because of their economic situation, a large number of students, like parents, one of the, I think, BBC articles had a header saying that if parents have 2 children, they choose which kid gets to go to school.
Wow.
Right. So it's a really dire situation as far as the future is concerned, and that's where it seems like now the Sri Lankan situation has become more of a underlying slow burn of a bad situation kind of normalizing versus the explosive Rajapaksa kind of situation that was there earlier, right? And so that's one part of what Sri Lanka is going through. It's also now they defaulted on their IMF debts last year, which this year they are looking at not just defaulting on their debts but asking for a line of credit. There are new presidential elections on the horizon, so there are opportunities for Sri Lanka to kind of reboot itself and kind of like figure out new ways of how to kind of stabilize their own country. But as such, I think there is a great need as a country. There is a huge I mean all the situations that went on, and one after the other, all the crises that Sri Lanka underwent have kind of exposed some of those deep seated systemic problems that the country has, and how it is dependent on so many micro aspects to kind of make itself run, which are not in its own control. So I think it's almost like the country requires a reimagining of how systemically they need to run. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, if I was to sum it up, like Sri Lanka as a country, while the big corruption problem and the leadership problem, which is like the explosive headlines aspect of it, got resolved last year to some extent and will continue to get resolved over the next year, I think that the boring systemic issues continue to persist, and I think over a period of time is going to really need some level of rethinking by the people of Sri Lanka.
And that's kind of like the thing, right? So when you were saying all this, what struck out to me was that all these so-called boring things, they are the things that eventually make a difference in the kind of like long term. And I'm almost thinking all the countries that we have discussed on and off this podcast, like there are so many systemic problems that they have apart from the explosive headlines, that you just feel like something's going to give eventually, right? And maybe China is a great example of that. There's just so many problems that just feels like, and you have that massive population as well, that it just feels like, yeah, some shit's gonna give eventually. And maybe Sri Lanka is just a very unfortunate microcosm or one example of that. But
Yeah, and in fact, one of the phrases I was reading another article about why the Sri Lankan protests went silent effectively, because the situation hasn't really improved.
yeah.
So what happened since then is that once Rajapaksa actually left office, right, a large number of protesters lost their fuel in some ways, right, in kind of like going ahead with the protests, and the remaining ones who are like, oh, we still need systemic changes, there's a term in Sinhala which is called Aragalaya, right? Aragalaya, or the people struggle, which is called in Sinhala. There was that national movement, and what they did was there's mass surveillance, legal action, and a lot of stuff against some of those leaders. The only thing is there is not enough like popular sentiment that is trying to like get these guys out and give them power to kind of go with things, right? And what Vikramasinghe has done well, and I'm assuming, I mean, I'm assuming I'm entering the opinion space at this point, has what a lot of commentators are saying is that that Vikramasinghe is like this guy who has kind of said that, there was a good Aragalaya, which is the ones that took Rajapaksa out of power, and there's the bad Aragalaya who are still protesting, right? And they've kind of caused this rift between that, and so there is no real momentum behind this protest anymore. And Vikramasinghe isn't like one of those classic all negative Trumpian kind of figures who can generate a lot of opposition and kind of consolidate a lot of opposition against them. So it's like I said, a slow burn kind of dissent is there, and there's a lot of slow burn anger, but people are just trying to make do at this point. I mean, everyone's just trying to cope with and see for their own families rather than think about the larger nation.
That is as bleak as it possibly gets until
Yeah.
until we, actually, I'll tell you the bleakest thing that I had read this year, actually, so far, and we will move on to happier topics after this, is many people think that Ukraine was the biggest crisis, etc., of last year. But there's this ranking of crisis, I forget who did this, one of the global bodies, and Ukraine was just 10th on the list.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. Yeah, so right up top are a whole bunch of things from, Africa and the situation in Yemen and Syria are far from resolved. So yeah, there's a whole lot of shit happening around
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah,
and
and
it's kind of
I mean, it's actually quite a telling thing in some way. Like, I mean, we've seen the classic media bias in some way, right? Like the reason we
Yeah.
are talking about Sri Lanka altogether is because they are our neighbor. I
yeah.
doubt anybody in the anywhere outside of this Southeast Asia region is even addressing what's happening with Sri Lanka, but in any meaningful way. But also the other part being that just like the current there is the equivalence that they do, like the current map of the world, right? The map of the world is based on something called the Mercator projection.
Oh yes,
right?
yes. Speak about this. Is nice.
And what they do in that Mercator projection is that, I mean, because it was done in imperial and colonial times, it actually expands the size of what the northern regions, the northern hemisphere kind of looks like. So North America, Europe, and all that. So in fact, if you were to compare, you will see North America is just as big as Africa in some ways, right? Whereas Africa is actually massively larger than any of these other places are combined. And the what this does is not only does it subtly kind of put that bias in our head about, oh, okay, this is, oh, Africa is only like, oh, this big kind of thing, but it also reflects in a lot of bias as far as coverage, as far as
Yeah.
understanding, as far as news is concerned. Like
Yeah.
250 people got like killed in some violence in Nigeria will get far less footage. Like I think at that time it was happening, right? I think when some Salvation Army in in an African country was killing people, was the same time Charlie Hebdo was happening in France, and Charlie Hebdo's like coverage just completely overshadowed like 200 300 people getting killed in Africa. So yeah, I
and
mean that
Ukraine is
media
another
bias
example.
is,
But yeah, but then that's always a problem. Like, how many things can you reasonably worry about? But again, those are bigger problems for a bigger show. Let us move on to slightly more cheerful topics.
yes,
Which
please.
is how AI is taking over our lives. No
Very
big deal.
cheerful topic. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometime towards the end of last year, we had done an episode on DALI 2, which was the key tech or the key AI model at that time. And apparently that episode went on to do pretty well and got featured on Spotify and stuff like that. So, wow, yay. And we all thought that, putting in a text prompt and getting an image output would be the biggest AI story of 2022. But then in December, OpenAI released ChatGPT, which has taken over timelines and has had everyone now worrying whether their jobs are at stake and things like that. It's certainly worth doing an episode entirely on that now that we've had some time to hopefully reflect on what this actually means for society and all that. And it's just been over a month actually that this technology's been out, and there's so many pieces written about it. New York City has banned ChatGPT in schools, and then regulation from a city level happens is when you know a technology is really reached mainstream,
Yeah.
right? Stuff like that. Authors worrying about how it's being. ChatGPT is even being used by nefarious actors to write malware and things like that. So, I mean, there's so much that we can talk about over here. I'm just not sure where we can get started. But what do you guys, have you fooled around with ChatGPT? Like, what were your thoughts on it?
So no first hand,
so Naren, go ahead.
no first hand. So I haven't tried it first hand, but I know a lot of people first hand who have tried it first hand. So uh, yeah, so unanimous, unanimous opinion is that it is scarily good at what it does. So writing things, writing stories, writing. So our friend Amit Verma says that. So he was telling me, he says, Naren, write your book before the year is out, because next year, the chat GPT will write a better one in your name. So that's the level of. I've been seeing outputs like from people who have got output out of chat GPT, and I'm very impressed. I mean, it's insanely good. So it is hard to imagine that this is not going to be weaponized in some way. So either for good or bad, and possibly for both. But yes, people are going to use it, and people who figure out how to use it with devastating effect are going to make, at least in the near term, a lot of progress or money or whatever your metric is.
Yeah. To me, what is interesting about ChatGPT, and I'm not going to think about, okay, what it means for this particular industry and all that, but it seems like ChatGPT is the most elegant reflection of our collective thinking. if that kind of makes sense. Collective thinking and collective
Yeah.
knowledge. I'd like to say
Yeah.
that was Wikipedia, but I think that's a very idealistic way of thinking about it. I think all our positives, all our negatives, all our biases is all built into Chat GPT. And that's the thing, right? This model doesn't create anything new. It just takes what is there in the universe right now, the online universe, and spits stuff out. In some ways, very similar to what Midjourney and DALI 2, etc., all are. They just base off existing database rather than creating something new. So to me, the mistakes that ChatGPT make are more a reflection on us rather than on OpenAI or this tool by itself. I mean, that's kind of like a philosophical way of thinking about it. More brass tacks is, I think it's a great tool for starting research. I think it's a great tool. It's a great ally. Yes, I do see some things that will
That's
be replaced,
exactly the
etc.
tagline you use for Wikipedia as well, by the way. But go on. Yeah. It's a great tool for starting research.
Yeah, and I genuinely think both of these tools are supposed to be starting points, right? You are supposed to build on something out of this yourself. So those who jobs are basically based on regurgitation, now those are going to be sidelined. I think that's pretty obvious. But I think tool like this is going to, I'm going to be optimistic over here. I think a tool like this is going to be a net positive. I think one big factor, however, is going to be how education uses a tool like this. Right. I think so. One of my favorite thinkers, Tom Goodwin, he put out a tweet yesterday saying when AI is used in schools, they want to ban it because they think students will cheat. But when AI is used in work, people are given compliments, said, "Oh, great, you're doing work more efficiently, etc." And he said, perhaps it's time to rethink education. And I think there's some truth to that because this is a strain I've heard somewhere else. Rather than banning tools like ChatGPT, why not teach students that, hey, this is what's out there in the real world. Now let's work with this technology to try and kind of improve ourselves together. The kind of like, what calculators meant a while back. And I think there's something over there. I mean, I don't want to make any predictions and stuff over here, but I think there's
The
something to
couple
that.
of points just on the education part, and before that, general Chat GPT and like my usage and experience with it. One thing that really blew my mind about Chat GPT is like, okay, you can have a natural language processor that kind of can regurgitate or summarize Wikipedia and kind of give you information. That's one level of it, right? What really blew my mind is about how creative writing can be done by this platform, right?
Yeah.
And not just creative writing, but like taking multiple strains of writing and kind of combining them and putting them like that. Like I talked about, like I think I gave a brief for ChatGPT to write a scene of a script where JFK is selling Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge tickets outside Maratha Mandir and include his famous sayings into it. So like there's literally a speech where JFK is trying to sell like DDLJ tickets outside Maratha Mandir. So this is like a and ChatGPT delivered on it and pretty well. So one thing that really comes to mind is, I think regurgitation is a thing of the past for sure, but also basic level creativity, which is what often gets passed off as creativity. And I mean, coming from a space where coming from an industry where creativity is valued a lot, like basic level creativity where you're like, okay, I can just write one turn of phrase in one particular way in a very predictable manner. ChatGPT has made you obsolete in that sense. So I think it's all about degrees of creativity and degrees of critical thinking now, right? What an AI can achieve is this level. What is it that you can add as a human? And the second angle, which is important, is it's not about competing with the AI, but how do you use the AI and what is the kind of briefing that you can give the AI and take the output and then add a layer on top of it so that you can make your work more robust? How do you use it as a tool in a better way? Right. So I think programmers of AI are going to be those who can effectively program and give great prompts to AI. So I mean, that's what I was looking at. Like people are writing about, oh, I did this and ChatGPT gave this response. But the ones that are the most interesting tweets are the people who have given the weirdest and the most extensive prompts that have made ChatGPT come up with great outputs. And I think that's the whole thing. It's about who gives the best prompts to get the AI to work in the most efficient, creative, and interesting way. So that is 100%. One angle of it. The other angle, which you talked about education, which I found really interesting as well, was the entire angle of saying that there is a lot of, I mean, it's pretty typical across humankind, and we've seen this quite extensively in India, is that the moment a particular technology surfaces, right, the first instinct of a lot of people in education is to ban it, right? Because they're like, oh, students will get an unfair advantage. What I feel, I mean, exceptions exist, but I feel it's a very lazy reflex in some ways, because what it really means is that the teachers don't really have the bandwidth to kind of separate what the technology is doing and what the students can deliver, right? And account for that in interesting way. Like, for example, if you're as a teacher going to get fooled by what an AI has written as original work from a student, or not able to cross check it or use the technology yourself to kind of understand how that student has done it, is where you feel the need to ban a particular technology. And banning any technology has never been a sustainable solution for anything, right? Because once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah. And the author that I was referencing, Tom Goodwin, he's written a great book on this called Digital Darwinism, when there's a newfangled technology about a century ago called electricity, and a lot of factories that had already invested in huge manual labor oriented factories. They were like, nothing, this is not going to take over or anything like that. Obviously they got wiped out. So you see many these parallels kind of repeat themselves again and again, right? All right, so we enough about ChatGPT. I think we can talk on and on about it, or hey, if you just want, you can just go to ChatGPT and ask what would Simplified host say about ChatGPT. I'm sure it would give us some sort of a response. So last episode we ended with personal updates from Naren and Tony, so I think that'll be a nice way for us to round up this episode as well, with the other two hosts over here, which is Srikeit, you and me. So do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So the largest personal update is I am, after having made my one sojourn in Southeast Asia, I think I'm going to be making another sojourn outside our great nation, to the great white north, which is Canada. And I will be, I'm relocating there right now, and going to be, so I mean, does not mean I'm in any way leaving Simplified at this point. We will just adjust time zones and make things work. But yeah, that's one big update from my perspective. 2022 has been a pretty challenging but also interesting year for me personally, from a personal point of view as well as professional point of view. I spent most of this year for the first time in my career not being employed with any particular organization. I spent the entire year as a freelancer working with multiple different organizations, and that was interesting and a great learning experience in its own way. Also, from my life perspective, like, understood how I want to live my life, where I want to kind of do things with, and how I want to like experience different aspects in my life. So it's been a really interesting year. 2023 has a lot of, I mean, from a personal point of view, it seems like it's going to be pretty seismic for all the changes that is going to happen for me here. So yeah, really looking forward to this year, really looking forward with excitement, trepidation, and like anxiety.
Awesome. And if there are any Simplified listeners in Canada, we know there are 5 of you. Please write into simplified.podcast@gmail.com, and Srikeit will get back to you and figure out
yes,
a time
or
to
you can
meet
reach out to us
over.
on Twitter and all that stuff. Would love to
Srikeit,
collaborate and
and
get in
Srikeit
touch with you
will
guys.
figure out a time for you guys to meet over yak milk or whatever it is you guys have.
Reindeer cheese.
More likely it'll be Tim
Reindeer
Hortons.
cheese.
More likely Tim Hortons. But yeah.
I think last year was good for me, man. I'm not going to lie. I think it was a pretty good year. I think for me, the biggest thing last year was the focus on fitness. I think that was a year I just took things up a notch a little bit, and pretty much every decision I was taking was based on that. Not going to lie. I think it was a good year for me in that sense, and I can kind of feel it. I'm fitting into clothes that I was last fitting in like some 3 years back, 3-4 years back. So yeah, I'm happy with how things turned out over there. And yeah, just happy to like do this with you guys every fortnight or so. It surprises me that like the timeline of Simplified is almost like a parallel to our professional lives in some way, or rather, when I think about particular moments in Simplified history, I always think about, hey, what are they doing the rest of life that way? Naren and I sitting in that studio for the first time, and me coming to Naren's house for the first time. So it's kind of interesting how this show has changed, and our voices and opinions in some sense have changed. But yeah, we will persevere through 2023 as well, and hope to bring you much more nonsense, including a 300th episode, which will happen sometime in March. We will have some plans for it, so we will let you know what those are. Again, our socials are the best place to look out for that, and we genuinely do want to do more with respect to community and all that, so we might set up a Discord at some point of time. Let us know, please write in. We know, I know that being a podcast listener, I know that it's very hard to move from podcast to writing out an email or something like that, but next time you're on Twitter or something and you see a bad joke or a yes minister quote or something from Canada, or I don't know, or sale on yak milk or globalization, whatever it is, keep simplified in your thoughts and just pop us a message or something like that. Tell us what you think.
This is the Indian equivalent of like, oh, do you ride elephants in the street kind of thing? And like in Canada, I think every street corner they're milking yaks or whatever else.
Amazing. All right, that's it from
So
the, I
fabulous.
think enough of 2022 now.
Yeah.
We have a lot to simplify in 2023,
Yes.
gentlemen. So let us go for it.
Yeah.
So wish you all a great 2023. Let's hope you grow and prosper, live long and prosper into this year. But
Yeah.
here we have
Stay
Naren
safe,
signing us off.
guys. Stay Stay New Yeared and stay
Globalized.
Yeah. And stay simplified. See you next week. Cheers.
Bye bye.